Please welcome to the stage my friend, my colleague, Academy Award winner and LE&RN spokesperson, the unsinkable, indomitable Miss Kathy Bates.
Thank you. Oh my goodness. Thank you all. That's just lovely. Oh my God. This is better than Broadway. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you. I want to talk to you in my words, from my heart, about a disease that I suffer with, along with millions of Americans and millions more around the globe, lymphedema, or as we call it, LE. I can't imagine what it's like to be a surgeon. I guess Hollywood can't either because they haven't cast me as one. It isn't lost on me that we both perform our jobs in theaters. Mine on a darkened sound stage and yours in the whitest of light. We both rely on masks, both internal and external. I can only imagine what intelligence, endurance, and skill it takes to be a fine surgeon. To be brave enough to cut into a woman's or a man's breast. How does that feel for the first time? Seeing inside living flesh and searching beyond what scans can see for what isn't supposed to be there, and then removing it and praying that you got it all. The worst part, I think, would be having to give bad news. I wonder if it gets any easier to walk down a hospital corridor toward worn-out families waiting with hopeful faces, and with the power of your words bring heartbreak or celebration. How do you have the strength to walk down that corridor when you're exhausted in damp scrubs, and you know you have to hurt them with the truth and then comfort them as much as you can and then move on to help the next one of us and the next one of us and the next one of us? I can't imagine how stoic you'd have to be to do that. I think that would be the hardest part of being a surgeon. I watched the sister of my dearest friend, who's a doctor, as she moved around the hospital room of her dying father. She switched from daughter to doctor, back and forth, from her own awful human grief to the elegance of her discipline. She was two people that day, speaking two different languages, withholding her own impending irrevocable loss so she could communicate with the hospice staff and finally make the unbearable decision to take him off life support. I think she hated being a doctor that day. Pretending is hard in its own way, but my mask washes off. Life is hard, real hard. So maybe you guys find a way, like she did that day and all the days before when she was a pediatric oncologist and more often than not lost the battle with the cruelest cancer of them all. You have to find a way to guard your hearts with your own masks that build up over time so you don't go mad, so you can stay strong and healthy and focus on helping people survive. What incredible pride and joy you must feel to save a human life. And because you're successful and we're surviving, now we need your help to educate not just each other, but all cancer surgeons everywhere, here and around the world, to help build a robust bridge from the trauma of surgery to quality of life after cancer. Now, you just heard the statistics, but they bear repeating. 10 million Americans suffer from lymphedema and lymphatic diseases, and that's more than those who suffer with muscular dystrophy, MS, Parkinson's, ALS, and AIDS combined. The World Health Organization puts the global number at 250 million. Incredibly, physicians are currently getting an average of only 15 to 30 minutes of study on the lymphatic system throughout their entire medical training, period. Therefore, it's not on most state licensing exams. This leaves them woefully unprepared to diagnose a disease that is both incurable and progressive. You are our first line of defense. Early detection is imperative. I want you to imagine having to live with lymphedema. And sometimes there is a cost to a cure, a personal cost that is devastating and unbearable. And in oncology, the cure can have a huge cost to the patient. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who've had to give up their life streams because they're no longer able to physically function in their jobs. The psychological damage, which nobody thinks about when they look at somebody who has a physical problem, the psychological damage is overwhelming. And it takes a tremendous toll, not just on those of us who suffer, but on our loved ones as well. Many I've met have considered suicide. And for sure, if you developed it in your arm, you wouldn't be able to be a surgeon. Now think about that. After all your years of hard work, suddenly, nothing. What would you do? Breast cancer runs like a river in my family. In the 70s, it was my mother's turn. She had cancer in her left breast and underwent a radical mastectomy. And they took everything. They scraped under her arm all the way down her chest to the bone. And the scarring was terrible. Her arm swelled to twice its size, so she wasn't able to fit into her nice clothes. My mother always dressed sharp. You might think having to give that up was a small inconvenience for her to bear in exchange for more years, but for my mother, who was born in 1907, dressing nicely was the mark of being a well-bred lady. She gave up so much for me to have the career that I enjoy today. I'll always regret that I didn't know how to help her. Then 7 years ago, it was my turn to have breast cancer. I was on vacation in France, and while we were driving south of Paris, I remember I was pressing my feet really hard against the floorboards like I was trying to put on the brakes, and it was like my body was saying, "You're going in the wrong direction. Stop, turn around, go back home." I was having severe intestinal discomfort, and I began to worry that I was about to enjoy a reprise of the LE&RN. But ironically, on the way back from Europe, I had to stop at Memorial Sloan Kettering to give an address to breast cancer survivors about how grateful I was to be cancer-free. The day after I got home, I had an MRI. My oncologist was calling as we pulled in the driveway. They had discovered a tumor in my left breast and a suspicious something or other in my right breast. So I told him, just make mine a double. I didn't ask what stage it was. He said they had just wished they caught it a little earlier. I want to emphasize that I'm profoundly grateful to my doctors and my surgeons to have survived ovarian and breast cancer, and if it weren't for them, and for so much hard work by so many people, men and women, researchers and doctors, over so many years of sweating in labs and operating rooms, hit and miss, dumb luck, and moments of grace, I wouldn't be here. I just wouldn't. However, when I developed symptoms of LE, my doctors weren't immediately aware of where to find a lymphedema specialist. They had to Google it. And lucky for me, they found a wonderful doctor, Dr. Emily Eicher, and I went several times a week for MLD, which is manual lymph drainage, followed by about 40 minutes in a pneumatic pression device, and you have to do one arm at a time so that you don't overload the heart as the lymph pumps into your venous cavities or veins or whatever it is. It's time-consuming and costly, and I'm really fortunate to be able to afford to pay for everything because none of it is covered by insurance, and millions out there are not as fortunate as I am. And for some time, we and others have been pushing Congress to pass the Lymphedema Treatment Act, which will cover the cost of expensive compression garments and treatments, but that is still very slow going. It took me a while to get the swelling down, and for a long time I was wearing men's shirts, sweltering in compression sleeves while working in New Orleans on American Horror Story for 2 years was unbearable at times. Recently, weight loss helped me, but it is important to note that this is not a weight problem. It is not water weight. It is lymph fluid. I was already angry about having to live with an incurable disease for the rest of my life, but when I found Bill and learned that so many millions suffer and that doctors routinely misdiagnose, I was as mad as a rattlesnake in a tin mailbox at high noon in the Texas Panhandle. He invited me to channel that rage into helping the public and physicians. Naively, I thought it would be a slam dunk. I mean, even look at our technology today. I thought, why don't we just get on the horn to JAMA and they can send out an e-blast to everybody? But it wasn't that simple, and it's like pulling teeth. Some of you already know about lymphedema and advise your patients about the risks of developing LE. Others of you may know about LE, but you consider that it's unimportant or a moot point if your patient does not survive. I was not counseled before my surgery, and my doctor felt the same way. He said to my niece, if she doesn't survive the surgery, if she dies of cancer, who cares if she gets lymphedema? Some of you may consider lymphedema a cosmetic problem, not a disease, and it's not fatal. In many cases, patients report doctors telling them, I cured your cancer. LE is not going to kill you. Be thankful and don't complain. Bill has asked surgeons if they tell their patients about LE prior to surgery. Often he gets the response, why would I do that? They have enough on their minds. Why scare them? And incredibly, one woman who developed LE in both legs after a hysterectomy went back to her doctor and told him she had lymphedema. He said, nobody gets lymphedema anymore. Just go home and stand on your head. I kid you not. Now, of major concern is cellulitis, a bacterial infection of the skin. Part of having lymphedema, you have to be very careful not to get any cuts or nicks in your skin, because that's the way the bacteria gets in. If left untreated, it can cause sepsis, which is life-threatening. I was hospitalized with lymphedema. I must have cut myself and not noticed it, and I had a raised red goose egg on my forearm on the side where only 3 nodes had been taken, so I don't understand that. But we live in a society filled with warnings. You get a drug prescribed and you get a listing of every possible reaction, no matter how remote, that might be a side effect. And you'd think every cancer patient in this country would be well informed about the possible risk of LE, but that just isn't the case. There are even things we can do before surgery to reduce that risk. Patients can now take advantage of technology like LDEX by Impedimed, the first FDA-cleared medical devices using bioimpedance spectroscopy to measure lymph flow prior to surgery and after to determine if there are any changes that could mean that a patient is at risk of developing lymphedema. Because the earlier one starts, the better the outcome. Also, you have axillary reverse mapping, ARM, that can be done at the time of your surgery, where blue dye is injected into your upper arm, and you can identify the lymphatics in that arm and avoid injury that can lead to lymphedema. Right now, the only treatments that we have to manage LE after surgery are manual lymph drainage, followed by the pump that I mentioned to reduce the swelling, and then by the compression sleeves like these that I'm wearing. You have to be fitted for these by a doctor. You can't just go in and buy them from a surgical pharmacy, because then you might be worsening the situation. In the last 18 months, we're very excited because we can feel that we are picking up speed. In 2018, September, the researchers at the University of Medical School identified the brain's lymphatic vessels as a new avenue to treat multiple sclerosis. And quoting from that article, the discovery comes from the same UVA lab that identified the lymphatic vessels surrounding the brain vessels that textbooks long insisted did not exist. In an exciting follow-up, the researchers have determined that the vessels play an important role in not only multiple sclerosis, but most likely many other neuroinflammatory diseases and in dangerous brain infections. And that work was supported by the NIH and a LE&RN postdoctoral fellowship award. LE&RN has now become has begun a formalized program to create lymphatic centers across the country and internationally. And here I want to talk about the fact that I got to do a keynote address last year at Harvard Medical School, and it was an amazing experience to hear these doctors like Dr. Elliot Chaikoff and Dr. Bernard Lee and Dr. Dhruv Singhal and Sumner Slavin, who's been at this since the 80s. And they're so passionate and excited about this. You know, there's a movie, The Graduate, I don't know if any of you have seen it, but the guy says to him, I have one word for you, plastics. And I'd like to say, all of you, I have one word for you, lymphatics. I sincerely believe that we are on the path to an amazing frontier, that we will make discoveries that will mean, well, as you saw in my film there, but they agree as well. And doctors at NIH and CDC are beginning to come on board. So LE&RN has has formalized this program to create lymphatic centers of excellence in lymphatic disease diagnosis and treatment. And Dhruv Singhal at Harvard announced they were interested, followed by Stan at Stanford, Joe Diane at Memorial Sloan Kettering, and Ketan Patel at Keck USC. David Chang at University of Chicago and the University of Texas Health jumped in, led by Melissa Aldridge. And they formed a committee to create standards that would show patients where they could go for comprehensive care. And if an institution has care gaps, before they could become a center, they had to confirm referral services that would cover those gaps. And basically, no patient will be left behind. And one day soon, I hope you'll only have to call a 1-800 number. Applications are due in July, and announcements will be made in December. On the legislative side, LE&RN recently had its second lobby days in Washington, D.C., where over 100 legislative offices were visited. Each office received a letter signed by over 30 breast cancer surgeons from the country's top universities, asking that NIH funding be dramatically increased to help inform the surgeries of tomorrow regarding how to reduce the risk of LE. And I was incredibly proud to be invited by Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro from Connecticut. She really gets it. She really understands what we're up against. She said, you have to testify. This is outrageous. You have to testify. So I was incredibly proud to speak before the House Subcommittee on Appropriations about lymphedema and personally request increased funding for the NIH and CDC for lymphatic research and provider awareness. NIH is very excited about the frontier of lymphatic disease, and who knows, we may discover the cure for diabetes, MS, Alzheimer's, and even the emperor of all maladies, cancer. During the last 5 years in my journey with LE&RN, I've come to feel grateful for having breast cancer and even to have lymphedema so that I can use my celebrity to speak for the ones who are invisible and to do some good in the real world without my mask. I know your patients bless you for their lives. They will bless you for taking this next step into the future with us. And I bless you all for hearing me today. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.